And I think we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Alita Madeira. I am one of the hosts for this year's OFFA 2021 Virtual Film Festival. It is our second year going virtual, and I think we're all really missing the in-person festival, but year two, we're at it again, and we've got some amazing films for you. If you tuned in yesterday, you got to see Marlene and some wonderful short films. And let's talk about tonight. We had two incredible short films, one from Italy. It was Inverno Timo's Winter, and that was directed by Giulio Mastromoto. And then we had One Room, A Family of Teachers, directed by Chris Mutton, who is here with us today. I'll introduce you in a quick sec. And then we got to see our wonderful feature by director Suzanne Crocker, who wrote, produced, and starred in the incredible documentary. Thanks, Suzanne Crocker, for bringing us First We Eat. We also have two other special guests today. We have Andrea and Katie from the Halton Environmental Network. So this is our sponsor for the film. Andrea and Katie can give us a wave. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe we'll just start off with you two ladies first, and maybe just tell us about bringing Suzanne Crocker's film here, and maybe the message that you try to bring to the Halton neighbors, and what you do at the Halton Environmental Network. So Andrea or Katie, whoever wants to take it away.
I'll take this one, Andrea. Well, welcome everyone to the call. It's so lovely to be with you all virtually, all within our own little bubbles, but still all together. So the Halton Environmental Network, we're so happy to bring this film to you, to bring this film to our community. At HEN, we like to inspire action through whatever means is possible. A part of that is film. Film has such a power to inspire action, inspire change. So one of the big, I guess, goals of sponsoring a film like this is to showcase different ways that we can all take action within our own lives. And we're so grateful to have different films, different perspectives brought together so we can share. And really looking forward to the discussion that comes out of it as well. So yeah, welcome everyone. We are, of course, happy to bring all forms of action to here, and we're happy to have supported this film as well.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to go ahead as well, Andrea?
I was just going to say a quick hello and welcome to everyone that's joining us tonight. My name is Andrea, and I am the lead for Halton Food. So within Halton Environmental Network, we focus on climate change education, and my program specifically focuses on teaching people how to grow their own food and have a healthy local food system. So I think it's a great connection to the work that Suzanne was doing and the journey that she was on with her family. And I just can't wait for the questions and discussions that come tonight.
Well, thank you so much for being here. That takes me into my thank you part. So thank you to our sponsors who bring all of these films to the festival. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you to all of our filmmakers who are part of the festival for your submissions and for inspiring other filmmakers to create and tell stories that we need to hear. Thank you to all the cast and crew who bring these stories to life. And of course, thank you to our board members from OFFA, Wendy and Tori and Jen. You guys do so much work on the outside, and we definitely appreciate all of your hard work. Thank you to the Halton community who supports the festival, who actually come and show up to the in-person festivals that we have, but also to the fun, to the viewers that we have that aren't local. And this year and last year being virtual, we were able to expand our audience. So that was really great. So thank you to all the viewers who are tuned in today. And I just want to remind you guys, there is an audience award. So anyone who's watching, at the bottom of the screen, you can vote for your favorite film. You can vote from 1 to 5, and you can actually vote on every single film that you watch. So 1 being a lower score, 5 being a higher score. If you can vote on those, we'd really greatly appreciate that. And you can vote for each film, so the shorts and the features. So thank you for being here, and let's introduce Chris Mutton. So Chris, he was the director for our short film, One Room, A Family of Teachers. Chris, you're also an editor, and he was nominated for Best Editing for Lifestyle and Reality for Big Voice. He's been an editor for CTV, CBC, Bravo, HGTV in Canada and the US, W, Slice, and today you're here because you brought us this really interesting story about schoolhouses, and I'm sure everyone learned a thing or two about schools and how much they've changed. And maybe you can just start with the little seed that was planted in your brain and why you wanted to create this film.
Absolutely, yeah. We have, like, in our family, a tradition of having a picnic every year. It's actually been going on for 120 years. And so I remember being a kid and meeting all of these relatives, and sort of finding out about the community where our family came from, which is near Brighton, Ontario, a little community called Shiloh. And that's where the first Mutton settled. It was William Mutton in 1832. And so, life was a lot different back then. And the schools were kind of a hub for the community that were one of the, community centers. And I just got to realize that a lot of my relatives, both my parents were teachers at one point in their career as well. So it's just kind of a thread through my family history that I was interested in exploring a little more.
Now, did you ever think about teaching? Was that ever a thought in your mind?
It bounces around a little bit. Actually, over the pandemic, I stepped in for a week for my editing teacher at Sheridan College. So I got a little taste of what it was like. And it was fun. Actually, I quite enjoyed it. So who knows, maybe later in my career, more of that will happen.
Amazing. Well, you definitely taught us a whole lot. We were talking earlier before we went live, the strap. I mean,
Yes.
Actually physically seeing the strap. I mean, you hear about these stories like the ruler in the hand and different things, but to actually see the strap, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about that part.
Sure. Well, I was talking to Muriel, before the interview, just kind of listening to some of her stories, and it just kind of came up in conversation. She said, "Would you like to see it? I have it." And I went, "Oh my God, yeah! Like, that's crazy." I mean, and you don't know what it's gonna, look like. You hear all these stories and people who were students back in those days when, obviously the idea of discipline was quite different. So when she actually produced it, I thought, yeah, we have to get this as part of the film. It was just interesting to hear her talk about discipline, and it kind of relates to, how the teacher was really so much like it's sort of said in the film, a teacher is also the principal. There was no real backup, I mean, for kids who were misbehaving, and the teachers, were so young as well that if you have unruly kids or kids are challenging the teacher, I mean, there's only a few years difference. Not only a leader, but they had to really be enforcing their classes and their kids. So yeah, I mean, it's a great thing that we don't do discipline that way these days, and that has evolved. But it's very interesting to see how it was done, over 50 years ago.
Crazy. I have to say, I'm a substitute teacher. So one thing I learned in teachers college, and every single teacher had the same advice: if you know classroom management, you will be able to teach. If you don't have classroom management, you will not be able to teach anything. And I got to, during my practicum, teach a split class, grade 6 and 7. So that's intermediate, that's junior and intermediate. And I couldn't even imagine more than 2 grades in one classroom. The fact that there were 8 grades in one classroom, and not even just the grades, but the age difference. You've got some young ones who are definitely rowdier, and then the older ones who are trying to be quiet. And I mean, I have ADHD, so I don't even know how these kids could focus in a class like that. But it was just incredible to learn these stories and to see what teachers went through, the $400 a year, the $1,000 a year, such great stories. Now, what was I going to ask you? Oh, what was the most shocking thing that you learned? I mean, we talked about discipline and the strap. Maybe there's some other stories. Maybe it's something that didn't make it to the film, but something that was really shocking about the
Hmm. That's a good question. I think to hear a bit about, like, from the perspective, from an outside perspective of the historian and also the person I spoke to from Black Creek Village, just how much stress and strain were on these teachers, and how it actually could have been very challenging, just in terms of like their mental health, because so much pressure was put on them. They were really looked up to as a community leader. Like, there really were, in that community, there was the Methodist Church, which also was very small and started, with a bunch of families meeting up, and the schools were sort of the same thing. So really, so much of what there was a lot of expectations. You had to be kind of a perfect person. So I don't know if that's really shocking, but it's definitely something that I didn't foresee in talking to these teachers, because you kind of see, teachers are responsible for curriculum and making sure the education of the kids is followed out. But there was so much extra, really, in those days. And they had to be a model for the entire, mini society that they were in. So all eyes were on you all the time. I don't think Muriel ever drank, because that was looked down upon. And she had to be, she told me she had to be on her best behavior all the time. There was never a break. So that must have been kind of exhausting,
Well, thank you for bringing it up. That's totally true. And even in my experience as a teacher, students will ask me a question and expect me to know the answer for every single thing they ask. And of course, as a teacher, if you're doing the same subject, you do know a lot of the content. But, if I'm doing, French that day and they ask me a specific word, then I'm not maybe sure about that vocabulary, you're teaching them not everything that really, you're just teaching them how to learn. And it's so interesting to see how education has come so far. It's not about the subjects you're learning. It's about every student understanding just how they learn. And it's changed a lot since then. And I think we got to hear the testimonials from some of those teachers, seeing that, hey, that might not have been the best way for that information to stick. But thank you so much for sharing your story. We'll definitely come back to you. I just want to introduce Suzanne. So we have Suzanne Crocker here, the director, producer, writer of First We Eat, our feature. So she was also, she won in 2014 at the Vancouver International Film Festival for her most popular Canadian documentary, which was called All the Time in the World. But more recently, First We Eat was one of the winners of the Audience Award at the 2020 Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Festival. So thank you so much, Suzanne, for being here. I mean, I think everyone here just really enjoyed seeing your struggle and not having to feel that struggle themselves. I'm definitely a coffee drinker. I'm drinking it now at 7:30 at night. So I think a lot of people were admiring your courage, your strength, and your passion for such an important thing. And hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing your story. Maybe you can share a little bit about this film and maybe what you're eating now. Are you back to 100%? Grocery, half and half, 10%, none at all?
I really had no interest in going back to grocery store food after that year. I really was transformed by the experience. And it's been, that year finished in the summer of 2018. So we're now, I guess, 4 years from the start of it, 3 years from the end of the experience. And I still am off caffeine, believe it or not. I haven't gone back. And I continue to eat 90%, I would say, local to my community, because it's just so, for so many reasons that you would have seen in the film. And I'm still loving it. So every fall, I'm still stocking the house with a year's worth of food. So all our meat, all our fish, all our vegetables year round, all our berries, all our eggs, all our dairy. Birch syrup, still my favorite sweetener. I'm still making my own yogurt and ice cream and things like that. but it's so much easier now, I have to say. I mean, having just watched the film, it might make everybody think, oh my God, I could never do that. It's so much work. And it was at first, but partly that was because I went in as a total blank page. I wasn't a cook. I kind of hated the kitchen. I don't know why I would pick this topic to do as an experience. Well, I do know why, but it doesn't fit with my previous cooking skills. I wasn't a very good gardener. I didn't know how to forage. And so I was really just learning everything as I went. And so I think that if I could do it, then not everybody is going to want to do it to the extremes that I did it, but if I can do it, everybody can do it to a certain extent, for sure. And now it's just routine and it's no big deal.
I think a lot of people had learning experiences this year, all those fads, people learning how to make bread and all these different things, but cooking, especially, I think people who work, a go lifestyle where they're, eating takeout for most of their meals throughout the last year, trying to eat from home often was a new reality for a lot of people. So that was really cool to see. But I love what you said about, I mean, it's pretty obvious once you think about it, but the word store, grocery stores, that they store our stuff, like obvious, but also, oh yeah, they just hold the things for us because we can't keep all of our things in our home. And I mean, it makes you wonder if you could grow everything that you needed for your family, even if it was just produce, like how many acres would one household need? And the way our homes are built now, it's not even a feasible idea. And I mean, you look like you live on quite a bit of property, several acres you grow on.
Well, my home garden isn't that huge, actually. And I think it's probably pretty average size for a home garden. So, I mean, I definitely learned that it takes a community. I mean, there are people who are amazing gardeners and homesteaders and live on farms who can do a lot of this themselves, but that's not the reality for most of us. And that was part of the challenge was, I mean, I knew from the get-go that I personally wasn't going to grow enough food to feed my family. So it was all about bringing the community together and seeing what this community could produce. And, if this community could go hypothetically from 97% of our food trucked in to 97% of producing our own food, like apparently we used to 100 some years ago. So that was what it was all about. So I can't tell you how many acres it would take, but I would say it takes a community, and it's better to do it as a community. And we have so much community knowledge in all of our communities. Much of it is untapped, but you think about people who have backyard chickens, for example. And it really, I think it really doesn't matter if you're living rural or urban. You can grow a lot of food even in an urban environment. And also nature just provides so much wild food. One moment. Not coffee. This time of year where I live, the forest is just a plenty of edible foods. And even, the weeds that I used to think were weeds in my garden, like chickweed, for example, is really edible. So yeah, there's so much more potential than we realize at the beginning.
And just how innovative you can be, like the Coltfoot ash for the salt and all the really cool things. I'm curious, what was your maybe favorite thing that you used to flavor your food and maybe still use?
One of my favorites are nasturtium seed pods, and probably a lot of viewers grow nasturtiums or have a neighbor who grows nasturtium flowers. And so don't discount those green seed pods in the fall. Eating them fresh, they're like a wasabi ball. They're so cool. And then if you have access to vinegar, which of course most of us do, except during my year of eating local, you can pickle them and they become a caper to put in pasta sauce throughout the winter. But then if you dry them and grind them, they make this incredible spice. And it's really like nothing I've ever tasted. The closest I can compare it to is cardamom. And so I now what I grow is only edible things, but my flowers are edible, and I grow a lot of nasturtiums because I want them for the nasturtium seed pods. So that was pretty cool. I still use celery leaves, dried celery leaves as a seasoning. And again, like, you know, why just cut those off and put them in the compost? Like, they are such a great seasoner. And I collected so many that year. I think, what did we say? It's now like for that year started, I still have Ziploc bags of dried celery leaves. I think I have a lifetime supply. And of course, yeah, I still, you know, birch syrup. We don't have maple trees this far north. And so birch syrup really became my #1 sweetener, and I just love it. It's got, I know I'm talking mostly to folks in Ontario, so this is probably sacrilegious to say that I now like birch syrup more than maple syrup, but I do. It's got all these complex flavors in there, and it's just, in and of itself, it's got all these other attributes that make things taste delicious. So birch syrup ice cream is just the absolute best.
And it's so cool how your palate changed, and you know, your husband, how he said the first few sips of coffee, and then after a couple, he couldn't even have it. Is he still off coffee as well?
No.
It is a drug.
He just went through the pain of getting all that back right away and feeling lousy until, you know, it all seemed normal again. So no, he's right back on the coffee like before.
Wow, it is so good. I'm definitely grateful for coffee.
Yeah, but it was interesting, his reaction during that year. Like, he didn't, his reaction after that year introducing foods, you know, how strong the coffee tasted, how processed foods tasted really salty, how, you know, you could have a bite of a cookie and you get a whole sugar rush and wonder how you ever used to be able to eat 6 at a time. And Gerard had a theory that maybe we use things like salt and sauces and a lot of spices to actually disguise the flavor of bad food. Because when you take that away and your taste buds come alive and you just taste food as it's meant to be tasted and as it is, it's so flavorful once you get through that 6-week hiatus of getting used to not having the salt and the spices.
Now, would you say salt was the thing you maybe most took for granted, or was there something else that was so difficult to prepare that you really appreciated it?
Yeah, no, it wasn't salt actually. Like I kind of knew going into it that we would get enough salt naturally from meat and fish, that we didn't need any added salt. The salt challenge really was more from thinking about preservation of food and how important salt has been over the ages for that. And so I just thought, okay, here we are in a landlocked place far, far from the sea. So how could I get salt here? And that became that ongoing challenge that you saw in the film. But the things that I actually missed the most were oil and balsamic vinegar and baking powder. It wasn't the coffee, it wasn't the black tea, it wasn't the chocolate or the avocados. It was like those 3 things that are such staples in our cupboard. And I learned, you know, ways to live without them. But it was those, I think, those kitchen staples at first that it's like, oh my gosh, like, how do you make a salad dressing if you don't have oil and vinegar, for example?
Now, was there a thought to maybe prepare stuff before the year started? Like maybe if you had, you know, fermented the apples, made your own apple cider vinegar so that you had that whole year, or was that done, you know, intentionally to start from nothing and prepare the whole year?
Well, you know, I mean, I started obviously in the spring, summer, because it didn't make a lot of sense to start in January because we would have starved.
Get hungry.
Before, but there wasn't anything that was made with ingredients that became contraband that were allowed to stay in the year. So, and you know, there's this there's a seasonality to foods, of course, and especially to forageable foods. Like, the forageable foods are only available often for a really short period of time. So spruce tips, for example, which are so delicious and full of vitamin C, like, you've got a week, maybe 10 days to gather as many spruce tips as you want to have for the year. So you have to be really aware of what's going on around you and the seasonality of things.
I just loved the family involvement. I have to say, you had 2 teenage kids and 1 younger. I don't think was a teenager. Tess was teenager quite yet. And that they all, had different roles. Some were part of the hunting part, the gathering part, the cooking part, the dishes part. One scene, the way you handled it so calmly, and you were like, I've been preparing everything all day. I made breakfast, lunch, and I'm just trying to figure out who would be the right person to do the dishes. And I thought that is like, what a nice way for a mom to tell family, hello, like, can you get down here and help me? And, I'm sure you had your struggles, but any days that were specifically harder than others that maybe you didn't want to include on camera?
Oh, well, as you saw, I didn't hide my tears from the camera. I mean, there were definitely days of exhaustion and days of struggle. There were definitely resentments that built up on both sides, the family resenting the extra chores and not having the grab and go foods they wanted. And me, of course, feeling like the little red hen, wanting, preparing everything and everybody only wanting to eat it and eating it so fast. But overall we worked it out, and I realized pretty early on that I couldn't push my family too far in the chore department, because they were conscripted into this. Like, my kids didn't volunteer to do this for a year, and I'm so grateful that they went along with it. So I was always kind of balancing, like keeping it good enough that they wouldn't mutiny and revolt, and yet needing them to help at the same time. I think, maybe in the homesteading days, when the family understood that there, was no store down the street, that everybody had to pitch in, and if you wanted to eat, then you had to help out. That was probably a little different than today. But really, I wanted to try it today, and see, like, now in this day and age. And I think, like with the pandemic, I think everybody gets this vulnerability of long supply chains, and how important it is to turn to your own community to see, if for the basics anyway, we can sustain ourselves. And that's kind of how I think of it now, like, I think, okay, this community could do that. And the other things are kind of the luxury items, like the coffee and the chocolate and the avocados and the bananas. And you don't need them. I mean, it's great if you have them, but they're not the staples. But we can feed ourselves on the staples, and we just really need these strong local food ecosystems in our own communities, so that when the next crisis comes along, which inevitably it will, that we have the system to support ourselves and feed ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm so impressed by your family. I thought they were just such good sports in it all, and all of them seemed to put in some work to help mom and respect your vision. So that was really nice to see. Let's move on towards maybe you and your husband with your medical background. You're both doctors, right? Now you had high blood pressure, and you had a growing teenage son. I mean, there was some weight loss, I'm sure, and maybe you can share maybe the medical or health aspects behind this.
Sure. Well, I did blood tests on myself before, and then every 3 months during the project, just to check on things. I asked my family if they wanted to do the same, but no one else volunteered to get their blood taken every 3 months. Yeah, so interesting things like you saw in the film, having high blood pressure, that resolved. I'm still off my medication, so that's pretty amazing. Certainly, Gerard and I, Gerard especially, had significant weight loss at the beginning, but it was weight that he could afford to lose, so that was okay. And I think, just being away from the processed foods, it just meant that we kept at a pretty healthy weight all the way through. The kids continued to grow, which is a good thing for their ages. And doing my blood work, everything basically stayed normal. And what was interesting to me was my cholesterol, because we were eating obviously a really high animal meat, animal fat based diet. and my cholesterol and triglycerides were normal all the way throughout. So, that makes one think, okay, maybe it's more the kinds of fats that are in all this processed food that is a bit invisible in the ingredient list that we bring home from the grocery store that's responsible for a lot of those things. Because certainly, tons of red meat, a dozen eggs a day, like those things were all part of it. And my vitamin D went down, as you know, in the film, but the burbot liver brought it back up. That wasn't unexpected. My salt was fine, salts were fine. Everything else was pretty good. At the end, though, two things were low. One was my iodine level, which I'm not surprised by because iodine is added to table salt to prevent thyroid disease. And so I'm still trying to figure out how away from the sea we would get enough iodine here. Still looking at that one. And also surprisingly, my vitamin C level was a bit low. And that surprised me because we had tons of berries, tons of rose hips, tons of spruce tips. So still looking into that one as well. But otherwise, everything totally good.
And what about the vitamin D? I mean, I guess the summer you're okay, but was that an issue as well?
Yeah, so the vitamin D, I mean, I think as Canadians, we're all probably a bit deficient in vitamin D, and I normally take vitamin D supplement every day, but that year I didn't want to. And I was kind of thinking, back to times before settlers came here, when Indigenous folks ate entirely from the land and, weren't taking vitamin supplements, obviously. And so I thought, okay, like how would some of these micronutrients and vitamins, those needs be met that way? And I think a lot of it is both from this variety of foods from the land, but also eating all parts of the animal, like not just the steaks and the roast, but the stomach and the stomach contents and the organ meats and the bones and the bone marrow and the bone broth. And there's a lot of vitamins and micronutrients in all those other things. So with the vitamin D, it was the liver of the burbot, which is the fish that we ice fish for, that is really high in vitamin D. And I just had to cook up a bit of that burbot liver, which when you saute it up, it tastes like scallops. Actually, it's pretty good. And do that once a week during the dark days, and my vitamin D came right back to normal. So that just kind of re-emphasized to me, the importance of eating all parts.
And just having a blood smoothie here and there to top up those amino acids. Awesome. We have a question. How is the community dealing with Gurdeep's sudden fame? So he was the Bhangra teacher. I guess he's a little famous in the community now.
Yeah, Gurdeep lives in Whitehorse, the capital of the Yukon, which is 550 kilometers from Dawson. He comes to Dawson quite frequently, and so before he was the famous Gurdeep, he would come to Dawson and often do a Bhangra class instruction. And I took a Bhangra class from him once, incredibly difficult. Well, as you probably saw in the closing scene, I'm not very good at it. He makes it look way easier than it is. But I remember him describing, as he taught us these motions, that these are motions, like originally was a farmer's dance. And so some of the motions are sowing the grain and some are harvesting the crops. And it's this celebratory farmer's dance. And I thought, bing, what better way to finish off this celebration of this year than to bring Gurdeep back to Dawson to teach all the farmers how to Bhangra dance. And so that's what we did. But which was great. So but I think Gurdeep is doing quite fine with his newfound fame. He remains very, very humble and very true to his beliefs, and he lives a simple lifestyle in Whitehorse, and he just really strongly believes in the joy that Bhangra dancing can bring.
I love that you included different cultural traditions involved in farming, and it was really nice to see there's singing and dancing, and every culture has kind of a different way of doing that. I mean, at this point, I can open up the floor. Maybe Chris, if you have any questions, Suzanne, if you have any questions, maybe Andrea, Katie, if you have any questions. We're just getting near the end of our time. I definitely could keep asking questions, but if anyone else has a question.
I have a couple of questions. Well, a question with a couple of parts, I guess. I have teenage boys, And I found watching, Suzanne, your kids from the beginning of it saying, I reserve the right to, have certain foods when I'm outside of the home that are not from local, marshmallows and and the gummies. And then some of the initial reactions tasting, I can't remember what the greens were that your older daughter just like was gagging on. Were there any foods that they fell in love with over time after that initial psychological, it seemed like almost that they needed to process the fact that they were going to do this, and over time I could see their experience change. But were there any foods that they grew to really love?
Yeah, I think there are many things they grew to love. I mean, this is pretty basic, but I have to say the carrot. The carrot was like the treat and the snack food and the candy in our house, and still now my kids can totally tell the difference between buying carrots from the grocery store and carrots that have been grown locally and stored in the root cellar through the winter. So yeah, they still really appreciate that fresh local produce, and berries too. A lot of the berries. There were some things that we had to create, like there's something called breakfast clafouti. We had breakfast was a bit of a challenge as far as keeping any kind of variety. A lot of our breakfast was fried eggs and mashed potato cakes. That was probably most mornings. And so there was this thing called breakfast clafouti, which is kind of like a custard based with berries in it, sweetened with birch syrup, that we would sometimes make for breakfast. And that's still a favorite. Delicious custards with berry sauce, that's still a favorite. Jen's cheese is still a favorite, Jen, the dairy farmer. And of course, we still, mousse is still a staple in our diet, and we still eat all parts of the mousse. The nose is an acquired taste that we haven't yet acquired. It's so interesting. It's such a delicacy to the Trondequichin elders, and but I'm going to keep trying. So yeah, there are many things, and then there's a few things that they just can't stand anymore. One of them is sugar beet syrup. I think it's pretty good actually, but there's a specific kind of taste in there, and Sam especially, he just can't go anywhere near sugar beets.
What were you guys eating for the Last Supper that they were certain that it was chicken and it wasn't chicken? What was that?
That was rabbit.
Oh.
Yeah, it did become this guessing game, as you saw many times. I brought home bear meat once, and that was also a guessing game at the table. And still now, the kids sometimes, if it's not so familiar, I get this kind of half look suspicious, and it's like, what is this we're eating?
Oh man. Kate seemed like the funny one who was gonna maybe put her hands up if she thought something was a little too weird. But Tess, she was just such a sweetheart, and I think you're number two who was there to just try all the things you were giving her, and she was such a good sport about it. She was a little star, I'd have to say.
Yes, indeed. And they all did really well. And lunches, school lunches, were also kind of tricky because there was not a lot of bread products and sandwiches and things that you normally. So I made a lot of dry meat, and they would take that for their school lunches. Sometimes I would make, a whole roast moose and root vegetables, and that would last maybe 2 or 3 lunches. But the dry meat was especially popular with their classmates. So I heard via the grapevine that they could trade off their dry meat for half of somebody's sandwich at school. So that seemed to work in their favor.
Oh, amazing. So
Yeah.
see, they didn't want those pudding snack packs. They wanted Suzanne's dried meat snacks.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I would have to say that Although at the end of the year, I questioned how much my kids had learned when they ran to the grocery store. They did actually take quite a bit away from the experience, I know now, with some hindsight. What was interesting is last year when the pandemic took away their usual summer jobs, they all ended up working and volunteering for our local farmers, which is something that never would have been on their radar before. And even this year, when their summer jobs came back, Sam decided to be a farmhand again. And he also went out last year and for a month in the bush and foraged for morel mushrooms for a cash crop. So you know, they definitely took some things away from that experience that I think will continue to be with them for the rest of their lives. And they definitely have a huge appreciation for where their food comes from.
I think anyone who watched the film has that same appreciation. We didn't have to learn it the hard way, but we got to live through your struggles and see how grateful we really need to be to farmers, because no farmers, no food, right? And it's, you know, the grocery store for me this past year has been my social. Like, that's the only place to go. And if I didn't have that where to go, I'd be outside in a garden, I'm sure. So thank you for sharing this incredible story of your family and of your community. Thank you, Chris Mutton, for sharing your story about One Room, a family of teachers. Just such an interesting story to see education and how much it's changed, and especially even this year, how much it's changed going virtual, right? That's a struggle in itself. I mean, you finished this film before, you know, COVID, but would you have added maybe the virtual aspect to it if you were still filming?
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I think teaching has been in everybody's minds, especially any parent, the role that the teacher plays in day-to-day life, and maybe a new respect for what teachers do that has been brought on by the pandemic this year.
So yeah, just a greater appreciation of teachers, of farmers, of community, and I think the general theme of family and how important family is. And family doesn't have to be blood. Family can just be anyone you decide to be your family. So thank you so much, Chris, for being here. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for being here. Andrea and Katie, thank you so much for sponsoring this film and educating the Halton region about sustainable lifestyles and permaculture and having you know, growing your food and knowing where your food comes from. So all of our viewers, thank you for being here. You know, try to shop local, try to go to those local farmers markets, try to have your own garden in the back, even if it's just a pot and you start with fresh herbs. It's definitely an amazing and rewarding thing. I think a lot of people tried out the food scraps things this year, you know, cutting off the celery or trying, you know, the lettuce. So it's happening slowly but surely, but we are on the right path for sure to create a more sustainable future. So thank you to our filmmakers for telling us these stories. And we're just so grateful to have you. And thank you everyone who's here today. Don't forget to vote for our films, for the short films and for the features. That goes for the audience award. So it's the score from 1 to 5. And that's all. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks to the Oakville Film Festival for bringing your films to the audience. And I just want to say one final thing, that if people are inspired by watching First We Eat, if you go to firstweeat.ca, there's a What Can I Do page, which has lots of suggestions from the very smallest to bigger, how people can make tiny or slightly bigger changes. So check it out, firstweeat.ca, What Can I Do? Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Tune in tomorrow and the rest of the week. Lots of films. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alita.
Bye-bye.